Hello, everyone, and welcome to Recovery Machine, episode 11. I'm your host, Corey, and I'm here with co-host Nathan. Hello, Nathan. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a Sunday, and I worked a 3-day work week, so that is good. I like it.
Very good. Yeah, good for you. Congratulations from all of us.
How's it going?
It's good.
Yeah,
it's good. I did a beautiful 5-kilometer walk around a local lake this morning. It was just like a Tom Thompson painting. It was beautiful. And so I feel great.
Awesome.
And looking forward to this episode. So for our listeners, we have kind of a different and kind of a special episode today. We have a guest. We have my dad, my father, Ron, is here. Today we're going to talk about grief and resilience. The question has come up in so many meetings that I've been a part of, and in discussions I know that, Nathan, we've had about what to do when you're maybe early in recovery or at any point in recovery, and life doesn't necessarily get easier right away. Oftentimes, abstaining or stopping our substance of choice leaves us with a host of challenges. And then just because you're in recovery does not mean that life gets easier. And sometimes it gets a whole hell of a lot harder. And
that is correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what we want to talk about today. And it just so happens that my dad, Ron, here is someone who has lived it and come out the other side. So Ron, from both of us, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here with both of you this afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, good to have you on. Good to finally meet you.
Nice to meet you, Nathan.
So we're going to kind of format it as we have done in past episodes, where Nathan, you'll ask Ron a series of questions so we can get to know him, and I'll fill in any blanks and ask some things that come to mind as we go. Ron, we have your consent?
You sure do.
Excellent.
All right.
Yeah, take it away, Nathan.
Now that the legalities are taken care of, we can move forward. So I guess basically we're going to start with kind of getting a little bit of a history from you, Ron. And we're just going to move along and discuss some past issues you had with alcohol, and then one major challenge specifically that you faced. We'll go through. We've got a series of questions here that I think will illustrate how you, starting from your struggle with alcohol, and then getting past that, and then maintaining your recovery throughout a very trying time. So can you give us a little bit of a backstory, like where you grew up, as far as, are you from the Lower Mainland? Is that where you started out?
No, I grew up in Regina, Saskatchewan. I lived there until my mid-20s. I had what I consider a fairly normal family in many ways. I had 2 older sisters, and they were 10 and 11 years older than I was. Wow. So that, and almost 2 families. Then there was myself and a younger sister and a younger brother. So there was 5 of us. And my father was, prior to coming to Canada, he worked in the coal mines in Wales from the age of 14, and then immigrated to Canada when he was about 19, and ended up in Regina. My mother was a Saskatchewan girl, stay-at-home mother. She suffered from depression, and my mother died when I was 25. As a kid, I lacked a lot of things in terms of personal. I had little confidence, terrible self-image, and just a real aversion to some socializing, because I wasn't confident in doing it. So I went to school in Regina, took an undergraduate degree in Regina at the university there. And in 1966, when I was in my early 20s, was married. And out of that marriage, I had 2 daughters. And that generally was my focus of Regina. After I got my degree, I was fortunate enough to get a job in a new residential treatment center for disturbed and delinquent boys.
Oh, wow.
And I was looking for something because nothing interested me. At university, I would take whatever I thought I could get a mark in. And by the end of it, I'd finished the degree, but still didn't know what I wanted to do. So when I tried this, I loved it. And that then led me to say, I've got to go back and I want to get a master's degree because I want to keep doing this. So that's when I left Regina, came back after the degree, and my career continued for a number of years with that organization.
Okay. So what exactly were you studying after you picked a direction?
Social work.
Social work.
Social work. Yes.
Okay. So you worked at this facility for a while you were in Saskatchewan?
Yes.
Okay.
And after I came out to UBC to get a master's in social work, I went back to that agency and then worked into supervisory and management jobs. And I stayed there from 1969 when I came back to 1977.
Okay. And then for some reason, you decided to move over to BC. Was there another career opportunity, or how did that work out?
Well, it worked out generally because during the last few years, 2 years, actually, 2.5 years that I was at that program, I held the position of director of the program. The existing director was away getting his PhD. And then when he came back, things were, it's difficult for somebody to be away and come back and step in again. And even more difficult when the person that was running the show is still there and has his loyalties. And I thought, well, I've always, since coming back from BC, coming from UBC, I thought BC would be a great place to live.
Sure.
So I started looking in the paper and applied for 3 different jobs, one in Montreal, one in Calgary, and one in BC, hoping the BC one would be the successful one, and it was. And so in 1977, the career went from Saskatchewan to British Columbia.
Okay. And you were married at that point?
I was married at that point, yes. In 1977, I got married in 1966. And we moved in 77, and the marriage dissolved in 79.
Okay.
Rather an acrimonious dissolving of the partnership, but it ended in late 79.
Okay. So, and you had 2 daughters with the previous marriage?
Yes. And they were living with their mother.
Okay.
When the marriage broke up.
Okay. So you're down working as, at UBC in this new position, and what kind of stuff were you working on in the program at that time?
Out here in BC?
Yeah.
Well, it was a new program, and it was part of what the government at that time called a youth containment program. So it was a juvenile jail.
Okay.
With no bars. It was containment through some degree of isolation. It was in an isolated forested area. And basically it was the worst kids at that time in the province who were heading to the adult system once they got old enough. But it was a challenge in trying to apply some of the things I'd learned in the treatment center to what amounted to a jail.
Right.
And there was frustrations in that. And I think I made some headway. And there were certain things I didn't like around the notion of working in a jail, and tried to make it a little softer, a little more amenable. And I think we were able to do that. And so that's where I got my start out here. It was a program that housed 30 kids, and with some success and some failures. obviously.
Okay. So this was there a juvenile program before that, or was this one of
It was a new one,
a
Nathan.
new one? Yeah.
The government had announced it as a result, I think, of many instances and many examples of juvenile crime
Okay.
reaching a point where particularly the politicians said, we can't deal with this anymore. We need something harsher. So within the province, there was two facilities, one in Victoria, one in Vancouver, that were contained. They were jail type facilities, locks and bars and the whole thing. And then two open camps, one on the island and one in the Fraser Valley.
Okay. So they put the camps far enough out in the bush that basically you can't run away, or it's difficult to run away.
That was good in theory. We spent a lot of nights out on the road looking in the middle of the night for kids that had run away, I'll tell you.
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
So what kind of age groups are we talking here? Obviously under 18, but
under 18. I think the youngest was 13.
Okay.
Yeah, and some pretty tough kids. Some kids that clearly you knew where they were heading, and they were heading to the adult system. Other kids, there was hope for. They particularly if this was their first or second time in a setting like that, and they didn't like it.
Okay.
They'd work harder to try to get out and stay out.
Right. So you felt, I guess, kind of a pull probably between maybe some more progressive type techniques that you learned in academia versus what would be implemented as kind of an old school, maybe punitive approach. Is that the kind of back and forth we're talking about?
That's the kind of back and forth. And with the four programs, there was, I don't think I stood alone in the group of four directors who wanted programs that were softer, more aligned to the needs of the kids. And the balance was, this isn't treatment, so you can't do treatment, but you did as much as you could within the limitations that were provided.
Right. I'm guessing there wasn't, well, for sure there wasn't nearly the amount of individuals probably showing up with addictions to drugs at that time, but were there some minors that showed up with hard drug addictions?
That was minimal at that time.
Okay.
The alcohol was certainly more prevalent, but the harder drugs, no, it was just not part of it at that time.
Right. Okay. So how long did you work at that treatment center?
I was there from 1977 till 1981.
I bet you saw some pretty interesting things.
Saw some things that you could write a book on, and it would be a bestseller.
Yeah.
Other things were, some funny things, some sad things, some things you regretted, particularly the aggression of some of the kids. Very, very difficult to manage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that time of your life, I mean, I can remember being very angry going through, especially around the age 15, 16. I think for boys anyway, it's you're flooded with testosterone, and any kind of a problem that you're having at home is going to be magnified times 10. And I would imagine that a lot of those kids in there probably had some pretty horrific home lives.
Terrible home lives. If there was one constant with the background of the kids, it was the sometimes deplorable, other times just not good home lives, if they even had a home life. Some of the kids, the worst offenders, were in there for murder.
Is that right?
Yeah. Others, it was not as bad in a criminal sense, but they'd run the gamut of every other community residential program that was being offered. And the judge in the community they appeared in said, "That's it. You're going to a juvenile jail. I've had it." So there was such a variety of kids, and it was boys. And before I left, about a year before I left, because of facility issues and space issues, they made these camps coeducational. And if you think 30 boys was fun in an open setting, 30 kids, boys and girls, was just a joy in that setting.
That sounds like a recipe for insanity.
That's a close description. I would agree with you.
Wow. So an interesting career, I would say. Where did you go after that?
Well, I went right down the road. A district director job had come open that I'd applied for and got. And essentially that was supervising two of these camps, the one that I had left and the other one down the road that was a DARE program camp, an outward bound type of camp. And then a series of probation offices in the Fraser Valley that handled both adult and youth probation and family court matters. So I had a district that I supervised from 1981 until 1992.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I imagine a position like that. I'm trying to consider what that would be like. It sounds like a lot of responsibility as far as, you've got the lives of young individuals in your hand, kind of you're playing a part at that level where you're probably involved in policy making that could affect these kids for the rest of their life. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Okay.
But the district job was strictly administrative, strictly management.
Okay.
There was no hands-on as there was at the camp I came from. It was strictly a management job.
Okay. So maybe a little easier from an emotional standpoint then?
I would say yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But still, regardless, that's a lot of ground to cover for one individual.
It was a big job. It had its stresses for sure, but it was manageable.
Okay. So, I guess we've discussed a little bit about that part of your background. How does Corey fit into this story? When did you get? I'm guessing you got. Well, I know you got married again.
We got to my first marriage dissolved in 1979. Libby, my wife, and I were married on January the 1st, 1982. And I want to just briefly get into something else because it's part of, it's a key part of the story. At that time, Libby and I had made up our mind we wanted children. There was one issue. I had had a vasectomy when I was in Regina. And how do we deal with that? And I remember going to the urologist, and he went through his, these are good signs, these are bad signs kind of thing around lifestyle. And at that time, he asked if I drank, and I said no at that time. And he asked for how long, and I told him. And he said, well, that's great. That makes a big difference in what we're going to try to do. And he explained what they were going to try to do. And it was a relatively new technique at that time. And so we paid the money and in I went. And after a period of time, we got the call from the doctor, I guess a couple of months later, saying everything's a go. Everything's bang on. It couldn't be better. And so we shortly thereafter had our daughter, Corey's sister, and a couple of years later, Corey came along, and that was part of our new life and new family.
Okay. Just a quick question: was the choice to have a vasectomy early on, did that have anything to do with working with these delinquent kids? And
No, it didn't.
Okay.
No.
That's interesting. You're pioneering this program. You're probably one of the first cases to have a reverse vasectomy in Canada.
Yeah.
Breaking new ground here.
The other thing, Nathan, that I wanted to mention after I said that I stayed in the community district job until 1992, at which time I moved over from that job to the job of warden of a large adult sentenced facility in the province, and became warden of that. Spent between 1992 and 1998 there, and then I moved over to a pretrial center in the Lower Mainland, and as warden again, and spent until 2003 there when I retired.
Okay. Wow, that's an interesting career path.
Well, it wasn't planned that way, and when I was offered the job in the jail, it was one that was so foreign. It just, I'd never even thought of that. That wasn't my thing. And I was encouraged to look at it and take it. And once I got in there, it was the kind of stress that I hadn't felt before. Highly stressful job. And I think that's number one, why they move people around periodically in those positions, to give them a bit of a break. But it was such an interesting job and such a challenge. I had gone in there because there was, they wanted to make a change because of the labor unrest within the center. And because it was a new center, it was all computerized. And the staff for that had come from Ocala, which was all manual. Every count was done manually, writing it down. Every process, every bit of detail was done by taking a pencil or pen and writing it down. Here, it was all computerized, and the staff had difficulty trusting that that the doors wouldn't fly open when they should be locked. Uninspired by the fact that there was potential in that new technology. And so the first year and a half of the program, when it opened initially, was a bit of chaos. And they wanted to make a change to see if that would help. And so that was what moved me from A to B unexpectedly.
Oh, that sounds like a terrible position to start in as far as stress is concerned. It's a lot of that is actually still happening, especially in the medical field. Some of our older practitioners are faced with being, learning this new technology as far as medical records are concerned and stuff like that, versus the old school way of writing on a pad and paper and keeping patient notes in a book and stuff like that. And I think when you're managing a facility that's going through that kind of a transition, you got a lot of people who are very resistant to that type of change. They're used to doing it the old way for a long time. And you've got to come in there and somehow figure out the logistics and then deal with the personnel on an individual level as well.
I think there was some disadvantages in me not having the background in adult custody, and there was some advantages. I didn't have to look down an avenue that had been traveled for 40 or 50 years. I could say, why not this? Or let's try that. So there was both advantages and disadvantages. But it was an experiment that up until a point, and there was periods of time that really, and I think Corey remembers this, got very stressful, very stressful. The two of us that worked together, that had gone in together as part of this change. After a couple of weeks, we'd sort of determined that we'd be best if we entered the building every morning with a target on our back, because of the amount of distrust towards management and distrust generally within the center. Yeah.
Wow. So go ahead, Corey.
Oh, I mean, I was going to say I was 6 years old when you started that job, Dad. And, and I remember not necessarily understanding it, but certainly remembering the palpable stress that you encountered and that you had to carry for that period of time, early on, especially.
Early on, yes.
Yeah, kids are sponges at that age for that type of stressful energy. They're very receptive and able to pick that up. I guess the question is that we might be leaning towards is your relationship with alcohol. And up to that point, it seems like maybe you were either a non-drinker or drank very little. Is that safe to say?
Oh, I think when I look back, Nathan, and I mentioned before a low self-esteem, low self-image as a kid, I think the drinking issue for me started at the last year or so of high school and into university. And it wasn't alarming, but for, a social evening, a group of friends going out, and I don't know what they do now, but at that time, one of us was old enough or big enough to go in and buy a case of beer. Mm-hmm. And then we'd go out in somebody's car and sit and drink the beer. And the thing I noticed was I would become inebriated in that process. Not necessarily flat out drunk, but inebriated, where the guys around me were feeling it, but not like I was. And the drinking got worse in the next few years around university. There were times where I would welcome, as much as I didn't like socializing, I would welcome a social event like a party, because I didn't look at it as a party. It was an opportunity to drink.
Right.
And when I drank, I could socialize with people up to a point, and all of the inhibitions and all of the, I can't say hello to him. I went away, and I became the life of the party. Sure. Probably the pain in the butt of the party, but the life of the party notwithstanding. I had also about 18, about that age. My dad wasn't a significant drinker at that time. He'd have a beer or a drink on the weekend, a Saturday, Sunday, but not during the week. And very often on a Saturday afternoon, he'd be sitting out on the patio and have a beer and say, "Would you like one?" Oh, sure. And sort of did that. And over the next number of years, in having a drink with my dad, it meant as it went along, I got to pour the drink. So okay. if it was rye and Coke, he would get, an amount of rye. I would get an amount of rye. And when I took the two glasses into the living room, mine was really light and his was dark. And so I had to keep my hand around the glass. And those are the kinds of things that kept going. It became a major issue with my first marriage, the alcohol. And it's something I'm not proud of, but it became an issue that became at times more important to me than maintaining a relationship. I knew that I was letting my kids down, and drinking too much. There was nothing else I could have done but let them down. When the drinking continued, when prior to having kids, when I went out to UBC, and this is interesting, there was no issue of drinking at that time. That 2 years, there was very little drinking. I had no money, had very little money, enough money to buy food and pay the rent, and that was it. So I found that when I was sort of preparing for today, an interesting, I could stop the drinking then because there was no money. When I was up at the youth camp, just as an example, I would drive home from work at the end of the day and I'd swear, I'm not having anything to drink tonight. Nothing. I'm not going to touch it. Nope. As I drove down the street, there was a liquor store up the street on the left, and the car automatically, I'd have to, automatically into the parking lot, buy the liquor and go home with it. thus creating more conflict at that time with my wife. And the process, got worse. Other than the time at UBC, came back to Regina after UBC, and the number of years there until we left in 1977. I drank a lot. It didn't affect attendance at work. It didn't. I can't say it affected performance. I'm sure it did, because there were certainly some days I didn't feel like going in. But that was one of my requirements. I had to be at work, and I wasn't going to miss work because of drinking.
Okay.
But it got more and more, and it created a really bad situation. And for me to say my first marriage broke up, what was the biggest reason? It wasn't the only reason, but the drinking was part of it. And then I established that new relationship with my current wife, and it was a good relationship, but the drinking went on. And we got married on January the 1st of 1982. And by February the 1st of 1982, or March the 1st of 1982, March the 4th of 1982, I'm sorry, Libby had said, look, either you stop drinking or I leave. And it was like a thunderbolt. 2 months, and that's the best I could do. And that was the point, Nathan, that I quit.
Okay. Was she, what was her relationship to alcohol? Was she just a social drinker, non-drinker?
A social drinker. There was times, I think, to keep me happy where she joined me.
Yeah.
In having, she would have one drink before supper. I would have 3 or 4.
Okay.
And I mean, and then she realized that perhaps she was, by drinking herself with me, encouraging that. And it reached the point where she said, I can't do this anymore. You've got to quit, and you've got to refocus, or I'm out of here. Okay.
And what was you're still showing up to work?
Oh yeah.
It seems like you've got that managed. What was her concerns at that time? Just that your health, or was your behavior off, or what?
When I finished, had my last drink, my behavior was still cold. It was still full of ugliness, and belligerent at times. And that stayed there, Nathan. And it was, we've talked about it in the past. It was almost like being a dry drunk. My behavior didn't change until the birth of my daughter, and then it changed.
Is that right?
And then Corey came along, and it continued to change, and those hard edges fell away.
Okay.
The reliance on alcohol was gone, I'd hoped, but the behavior had to have another series of events to bring about a change at that time. And at that time, I hadn't gone to counseling or any other program. So it was just Ron, I guess you could say.
You weren't doing, you didn't do 12 steps.
No,
Dad.
No, I didn't. No.
Can you speak to why you didn't?
I think a couple of reasons. One, I believed at that time, after I'd stopped, and the only way I can explain it, after I stopped drinking, I was absolutely shocked when I reached about the 5th day, because I tried to stop before, and I've one day. And then by the 2nd day, I'd say, well, look, I proved that I could stop drinking, so I'm just going to get another. But I couldn't. So here's 2 weeks, here's a month. And as a result of that, I felt much stronger, much more able to manage that, not manage the behavioral issues that were there, but manage the drinking. So my view was, I don't need, probably very naive, I don't need that. In answer to your question, Corey, I can do it on my own. And the other thing, I had known a number of people that I'd worked with who's either a relative of theirs or themselves had belonged to AA, and nothing but positives. They just loved the experience, but it didn't turn me on. And I'd looked and studied it a bit to find out what I would be getting into, and I just know I'm going to do it on my own. Now, if you'd come along to say we've got the Acme treatment center down the road, that's a beautiful thing, and you can go for nothing, the answer would have been no. I'm going to do it myself.
Okay. Well, I mean, people do that. You know, it's not using a peer support group is not necessary to change your behavior, especially if it's something you really want to do.
Yes. Yes.
And having proved to yourself that you were able to get away from that behavior pattern, and saying that you were left with, I'm assuming here that the alcohol kind of brought out you mentioned as a hardness to your personality, or a sharpness that was maybe worse when you were drinking and then persisted even when you stopped.
Yes.
Was that something that you think it had always been with you, or was that maybe something that you developed as a secondary to maybe being a part of the prison system, or where do you think that came from?
I think it was tied into the inner Ron, the kid younger that didn't have the confidence to move forward. And I think the fact that I was able to quit, Nathan, on my own, created that ability, at least to fool myself that I could do it on my own at that time. It was, and the behavior itself, the coldness, the belligerence, I think was a function of the amount I was drinking. It was, because part of it was, get off my back, I'm not hurting anybody, kind of a thing. And then when I did stop, that stayed there because I could find other things.
Yeah.
That, it's not because I'm drinking, it's because I'm doing something else. So I think there was probably whoever was living with me, and I'm talking about my family, my wife, had to deal with a lot of things, I think, that I didn't really focus on and didn't want to be aware of in my behavior, in my attitude.
Okay. That makes sense. I did have one question about what you said earlier when you went in to see the doctor about your reverse vasectomy. You told the doctor that you weren't a drinker at that time. Were you?
No, I had stopped already.
Oh, okay.
I had stopped, and then it was a few months after I had stopped that we started talking about our desire to have kids.
Okay.
And so I had stopped for a few months, and he said that was enough. That would help.
Okay.
Could you, Dad, speak to the messages that you got from doctors previously prior to the vasectomy? Sure. You know, because there's some interesting information there.
I had a couple of examples that when I was living in Chilliwack, I had a need to see a medical doctor, and I didn't have one. So I looked one up and went and had an appointment and walked into his office, and whatever was wrong with me, he said, no, there's no problem. I'll just give you a prescription. That's fine. And he said, any other issues? And I said, well, I'm starting to get a bit concerned about how much I drink. And he said, how much do you drink and what do you drink? So I told him, and at my top, Nathan, I could finish close to a 26 a day, and I was drinking 7 days a week. But at that time, I said to him, well, maybe I probably lowered the amount to talk to him. I said, half a bottle, 3/4 a bottle a day. And he said, what are you talking about? He said, I drink more than that. I wouldn't worry about that. So I left his office feeling just $1 million. See, I'm right. I don't have to stop drinking. Yeah. And I had a doctor as well a number of years later that he made kind of the same kind of comment that why are you stopping drinking? If you don't want to drink hard liquor, drink beer.
Yeah.
He said, that's what I do when I need to slow down a bit. I just go to beer. So he said, Ron, start drinking beer and you'll be much happier. Okay. So there it goes again. I don't have to stop. My doctors. So there was a couple of examples like that I used. I actually used
Yeah.
to my benefit to say, I don't need to stop.
It's a sign of the times too. I mean, it used to be like in the 70s and 80s. I mean, you look back, everybody smoked, everybody drank. Yep. There was way less emphasis on health in general. Yep. And it's interesting that you said that you told your doctor the first time that you drink maybe half or 3/4 of a bottle, because doctors now are trained to double or add a third to whatever the patient says. And
yes. And
that would have been pretty much bang on in your case.
That's exactly right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, I'm sure other people have run into that going in and seeing their doctors too.
Absolutely.
Either about smoking or drinking. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to pause us for 1 second here, guys. And we're back. Sorry about that, folks. I had to change my shirt. I was too hot.
Right on.
So I guess we can continue from there up until, so you had decided to quit drinking and you'd managed to pull it off. When was it that you got around to dealing with this kind of inner Ron that was maybe a little cold or harsh?
Well, I think at that time, and the biggest help that I had with the issue of drinking came from my wife, and she is a extremely strong person, and she did things that sort of she developed a very routine structure, which I live by for our home life. Everything was predictable. We talked a lot. We talked endlessly. Mm-hmm. And I think if I was to be completely honest, Nathan, some of those traits are with me today in a more contained fashion.
Sure.
But as we went through that and particularly started planning for our two youngest children coming and joining us, life changed, because then we moved into a house. Our life became, in my view, much more positive. To maintain the house and the yard, there was a focus of work that had to be done, and I'm the one that's going to do it. My wife's family was extremely helpful, all of them, in terms of their assistance in being able to move that along, and they had a history in parts of her family with alcohol issues as well. So they knew what their sister and their daughter was dealing with, but at the same time, they were extremely fair and good to me to provide as much support as possible to get the drinking under control or stopped. And I think the personality issues just some of them mitigated at that time slowly. Other ones stayed with me and faded by the way. And there's still some here today. When I'm on, I'm on. When I'm off, I am a little more difficult to deal with.
Sure. This is the case with being a human being.
Yeah.
Was your wife surprised to see that you just kind of turned off the drinking like that?
No, I think she was, to be honest, I think she was probably desperate enough that I deep down, I kind of think she, with a very direct warning, either you quit or I leave. And she knew that I knew she was serious. She would have walked out tomorrow. If I came home and with a bottle, she would have been gone. So she was the one that established and provided me strength. And I've had a lot of time to think about that. And she was the godsend for me. to help me out of it,
Mhm.
and to provide the support and understanding to try to get me to the next step and the next step and the next step.
Yeah, that's interesting that she knew to draw that line in the sand. She guessed that it was going to be the right thing for you, and she also knew you well enough to know that there would be a good chance that you would actually change your behavior if faced with such a threat, which I
think
find
so.
I find that
think
pretty
so.
interesting.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I
so.
mean, I see you two as about as close to soulmates as you could get, and Mom knows you extremely well, and I'm sure
Yes.
even then knew you extremely well,
Yes.
and that I agree that she probably just knew that was what needed to be in it, but also was looking out for herself and
Yes.
setting a boundary there for herself that had to be done.
Oh, it
But
had to be. She had to. She would have
Yeah.
gone down with me,
Yeah.
because I don't think I could have gone on a lot longer without something happening that either destroyed my life or both our lives.
I think so. We've said that before in our family,
Yes.
that really saved your life.
It did. It
Yeah.
was. Yeah, I wouldn't be here today without that.
What a wise woman.
Oh, really wise.
So having spoke to that, how did things continue once you had kids, and you must have kind of found other things to do? I guess you're saying that you moved into a house, so you had kind of new maintenance tasks and stuff like that. What other things were you doing at the time to kind of keep yourself busy?
Well, I mean, the work around the house, it was all we could afford. It was a very small old house. So it needed lots of attention, lots of love, had a big yard, and I did a lot of work in the yard and improved that. I recall coming home from work and sort of taking the kids for a walk, and then if it was still light, working out in the yard for an hour or an hour and a half. And I enjoyed it at that time. So I did that. We had our hands full with our new family, and at that time too, my oldest daughter, Megan, was living with us when we were in the house, and she had originally, with the breakup, had lived with her mother, and then she had said to my wife one day, "I never want to be separated from my dad again. Can I come and live with you?" And she did, and she lived with us for a number of years.
Okay.
So we had our hands full with a teenager and two little kids, and
okay.
all the things we were trying to do around the house.
Right. So you've got two younger kids, and then Megan. How old was Megan when she arrived?
She would have been 13 maybe, 12, 13.
Okay. So there was a tragedy that occurred with Megan in 1987. And can you describe what happened?
Megan was she was a manager of one of the managers of the junior boys basketball team at her high school. And they were planning a trip to the interior for a basketball tournament. And we'd encouraged her to go, and she wanted to go. And there was another girl that was a manager as well. So they would stay together, and they headed out. And my wife ran her over to the school to get her ride. And that was on a Friday afternoon, about 1:00. And Friday evening, about 7:00, our doorbell rang. And it was two RCMP officers who came in to tell us that there'd been an accident. There had been 4 kids that had been killed, and our daughter was one of them. And they were very kind people. Talk about people that are helpful. The way they handle themselves was a real help as well. So we then had that face to face and to work on. I remember calling my wife's parents, and they both came over. And within a day, and I think it was interesting too, it shows sort of my wife's perspective as we were sorting out our initial grief and trying to say, well, we've got too much to do right now, that we got to keep moving. We got lots of help, but we got to keep moving. So we'll do it together. And over the next day, two people that night, my wife's brother had phoned, and he'd had a history of alcohol and drug abuse for years. And he had found out what had happened, and he'd phoned to say, I've got to come over right away so I can help Ron, because he's going to want to start drinking right away.
Right.
And Libby said, no, he's not. He's not going to drink. And the next day, our doctor phoned, who was also a friend of ours, and she had said to Lib, I've got to come over. There's a number of things I can prescribe, but I want to do something for Ron so he doesn't feel he can fall back to drinking. And she said, no, don't do it. It's clear to me he won't drink. And she was absolutely right. It had not crossed my mind. With the horrendous news and seeing what was ahead of us. Again, I had to rely and wanted to rely on her to help see me through. And the next number of days was just part of it sort of blurred out because of the nature of the accident. It was on TV, on the news.
Mm-hmm.
It was, the newspapers were full of it. The whole community. We had people showing up to our door with food that we've never met before.
Right.
We knew there was other families involved, but had never met them. We had to plan the funeral, which we did. And after people left, family members, my dad and my brother came out. And after they had left, we're left by ourselves again. But not long after that, Nathan, we ended up developing what could best be looked at as a bond, a very helpful bond with the other three families. One of the families suggested that we get together, and we did. And out of that came some discussion around how bad we felt the school district's travel to sports events policies were, in terms of how they didn't follow and maintain a requirement around checking criminal record searches, checking the level of driver's license, checking the driving record, stuff like that. And so we met at times every couple of weeks, or I'm sorry, 2 times a week. And I was at somebody else's house, and we rotated that. And the discussion got to, we need to develop a presentation to the school district to let them know what we want, which we did. And we need to put our heads together to figure out how we're going to proceed. And it was, with all of the collective grief in that room, we, as 4 families, were the only ones who knew what each other were feeling, what each other had experienced. And we knew every detail of the accident, how it happened, where it happened, why it happened, and the extent of the devastation around people losing, families losing their valued teenage children because they went to a school tournament and got were killed. And as a family, Liv and I benefited from that. And I think the other families did too, because on any given day when anybody was down, all they had to do was pick up the phone and call one of the other family members. And you knew you were going to get a fair reception and understanding at the other end. So that really, really helped us.
Was that something that was suggested to you, or was that something that just happened organically, that your your wife and yourself ended up kind of getting to know the other families?
No, it was initiated by the husband of one of the families. He said, let's just get together. And there may be some benefit in just socializing. There may be, he obviously had a little bit of an agenda, and that was to pursue some of the things that he had looked into after the accident and didn't like in terms of how it was handled. So there was a reason, but the support, the help was the primary.
It actually makes a lot of sense. And I wonder if that's something that they recommend for similar tragedies that happen now. I wonder, if you're still in contact with those other families, I would be interested to know how many of the husband and wife couples are still together.
We are not in contact. The contact went on maybe for 4 years.
Okay.
In that range. And then it just sort of, and Lib and I both said, maybe now is time to, if there's anything meant to keep connected, it'll happen.
Right.
So I don't know if they're still together or not. An interesting question.
Yeah, I just asked because, as you probably know, many married couples have trouble making it through such a devastating loss.
Yes.
So I guess one way that you processed the event was kind of getting together with these other families, finding support through them, and then maybe putting some of your energy into righting a wrong that you felt was, a situation that you felt was inadequate with the current guidelines or standards for the school at that time.
Yes.
That was probably helpful. Was there other things that you used to kind of get through?
Well, there were some things that were not sort of normal events. When I looked at the question, the inquest, and say, well, what's the value of the inquest? Lots of value. It was a process that lasted, in this case, 5 days. I have never seen the array of experts that were called in on traffic accidents, on speed, because the nature of the accident was really horrendous. How it happened with a semi-trailer and hitting a van, and that was helpful. The family stuck together for that. It was almost an extension of the group. Now we're going to the inquest, and we came out of that with as much anger, but more understanding. And that understanding, at least with Libby and I, helped reduce the anger. To say, it's normal to be angry when your child is killed in an accident that could have been prevented, could have been. And it was something that sort of fit in to our feeling that the school district sort of wasn't doing their full process of checking out and identifying the dangers. Like the person driving had 3 previous drunk driving charges. Yeah, 3 of them, and that came out at the inquest. So that we didn't know that ahead of time. That came out at the inquest. Okay, so one of the events sort of led into supporting another, and that was the traffic or the trip protocols with the schools. The other thing that sort of really helped all of us, and Corey was very young at that time, but we headed over. We were, floundering in the spring in terms of, now that this is done, what's next? And our doctor had said, well, I go to a place called Hornby Island every summer to get away. And it's a beautiful place. It's like Greece. How would you feel if I could arrange the people that I rent the cottage from? Maybe they'd rent it to you. We had no idea what it was or where it was, but said, sure. Well, that established for us, for me, a place of extreme beauty. that I don't think I would have noticed.
Okay.
A place of extreme beauty, and a place that I'm sure in the back of my mind, this was Megan's place, if that makes any sense. This was an idealistic, or no, it was almost a picture perfect representation of nature at its best.
Nice.
And thought Megan would love it here.
Mm-hmm.
She would have loved it here. And so I think we went back a number of years after that, each year for 5 or 6 or 7 years, back to the same place, and then started renting different places to try them out, and really, really enjoyed it. But it was a rejuvenation center for our family.
Yeah.
That wasn't planned ahead of time, but it fit in with, the 4 families. I didn't go back to drinking because I've said my wife and my kids, that's where the responsibility went. But the knowledge, getting rid of the anger, getting rid of the rage. One of the examples that we were talking about, and I wasn't going to mention it today, but I will, because it's the rage thing. I had sometime after the accident, I was over at one of the shopping malls and had Corey, pushing Corey in a cart, walking across the parking lot, and our daughter was holding my hand. And as I walked in front, there was a roadway coming across, and I waited, and there was no cars coming, so I stepped out, and this woman driving wasn't watching and zipped right ahead and just clipped the cart that Corey was in.
Oh,
just
man.
It. My response, I turned to her, stared her down, walked over, and kicked her front door, as hard as I could.
Right.
And thought, what have I done? And turned around and went into the mall. And the first guy at the door said, I saw that whole thing. Good work. He said, he said, you should have called the police. So, I mean, the rage was there. And that part took a while to work itself out.
Yeah. I can't imagine, but with emotions on that level, it probably takes quite some time, no matter what you're doing, to process them to a point where you're at some level of peace with the way things went. I mean, we were talking about years and years. What did you take time off work when that happened? I mean, I'm assuming you took some time. What length of time did you?
Looking back, Nathan, it was ridiculous. I took a week.
Oh, wow.
And what a mistake. What a mistake. I think I had a need, looking at my own needs and requirements, to get back to work. So maybe I'll forget it. Maybe I'll just move ahead, and we can. And, my thinking even at that time, when Megan was killed, and I think this goes back to the insecurity of and the shame that I carried for a number of years. My whole process of analyzing that is that if I hadn't been born, Megan wouldn't have died. And that's how I looked at it. If I hadn't been born, obviously she wouldn't have been born,
right? And
she'd still be alive. And it took a while. It took a while for me to get out of that kind of thinking. And the thinking was harder to get out of, because in the past I'd grab a drink, have a couple of drinks, and I'd forget about it. But it was there, raw, having to work on and deal with.
Did you? I want to say that that's probably a lot of people's response to tragedy is to. I mean, we all know that there's probably a right way and a wrong way of dealing with the emotions associated with something like that, or maybe there is no right way. We'll say there's better and there's worse ways.
Sure.
But I could see you wanting to get back to work just from I need to get away from this nightmare for a little while and focus on something else.
Yeah.
That part's understandable. What did you end up reaching out for, or was any counseling provided? Was there any source of help in that way?
No, I didn't avail myself. The government program would have provided something, but at that point, I wasn't open to that.
Okay.
We had were floundering. I was floundering at that time, and my wife had a friend, a local church minister in the community, and he had become more and more concerned about my behavior was causing grief, my attitude and selfishness at times, grief for my wife, and I'm sure my kids in their own way. And he said, I think you guys really need some major help. Okay. And he said, I'm going to contact somebody that I have the highest regard for. And he's a counselor of renown in the province. And let me see if I can convince him. And he phoned back a couple of days later and said he'll take you both. Now, we lived in the Fraser Valley. His office was in West Vancouver. And we ended up seeing him at times 3 times a week. And
Wow.
it's not every time, once a week, at times twice, but there was times 3 a week. We attended 60 sessions by driving in, and it was the best experience for me, who was shutting himself off from any kind of help. It was the best experience. I mean, he even looked at me at one point and said, Ron, I want to say something to you. Okay. He said, we've talked a bit about the shame you've carried. He said, I want to tell you that you felt shame from the time you first drew breath when you were born. That's how deep your shame is.
Yeah.
And he told us very clearly, you don't have the right to not deal with your grief 100%. You owe it to your kids. You owe it to your 3 children. And you've got to focus on that. And I think we did. I think we did to the best of our ability. We had a great attitude towards his style, his perspective, his knowledge. He was an interesting person, an interesting background. He was both a lawyer and a church minister.
Wow.
He just was a phenomenal counselor, and he had helped us so much. So that was, aside from me relying so much on my wife and saying that how much she had progressed me from down here to up here over a period of time, we have both always felt that this particular counselor was just, he saved our lives ultimately.
Wow.
At a different level.
You guys were just on the brink of becoming that statistic of couples who lose a child ending up in divorce.
Ending up in divorce. Yeah. And Mom had told me that when she had originally, her friend, the minister who made this referral for us, she had said to him one day, I'm really having trouble living with Ron and his attitude and his belligerence at times and stuff. I'm going to leave. And he said, no, you're not. No, you're not. And he said, give me 2 days. And that's when he went out and said, you're going to see this guy. If I have to bribe him to see you, kind of a thing, you're going to see him. And that was the best thing that could have happened. Totally the best.
Amazing.
Dad, can you speak to, just to provide a little additional context? Mm-hmm. I mean, you guys were, as if the story thus far wasn't enough, you guys were facing biblical levels of stress and challenges. Can you speak to the additional challenge that you guys were facing simultaneous to grieving Megan's loss?
Help me out, Cor. I'm blocking a bit.
Oh, it's the daycare story.
Oh, the daycare. Yes. both Corey and his sister were in 1 or 2 days a week in a daycare, and that gave Liv a bit of a break to get some things done, and it allowed the kids to socialize with other kids. Well, we found out that there was some abuse taking place at the daycare that did affect our kids, and the rage that brought on. I mean, I could have gone in there and single-handedly whatever, but I didn't, and was advised not to. And the police were aware of it, and they'd said, no, just stay away. Good. But that was thrown in. And thank you, Corey, for reminding me. There was so much I forgot about that here we have 2 young kids, and we're trusting a daycare center that was recommended by the local community services society agency, and look what's happened. Wow. And so here's our grief, reproduced in another area, and we had dealt with that, and it took a long time with that to work that out.
And that same counselor helped you with that.
The same counselor helped us with that, and he had some major help that he directed towards us in that one.
Yeah. Well, that's a tremendous burden to be saddled with all at once. One of those things would obviously devastate a parent, but both are. Yeah, that's significant. I'm wondering how. I mean, this must have affected your other children somehow. How did you try to mitigate all these events as far as their impact on your younger kids, including Corey?
We as a foursome, the 2 young kids and Liv and I, we pulled together as much as I think was humanly possible. We did lots of things together. You'd have to see my wife and her mothering skills. They're just tremendous. And the time that was spent with the kids doing things, overseeing, and in both cases, they, particularly our daughter, didn't really, she was traumatized both with her sister not coming home, and now with this, and she turned inward, and it took it was a real battle to make sure that she came out of her shell,
right?
And eventually she did. And I just think that with all of the heartache we had and all of the stress and anguish, my wife and I worked well together to see that our first and foremost and only priority was our 2 kids. And I say 2 kids, my second oldest daughter from my first marriage was with us off and on. But I don't put her in the same category as Corey and Kate because of her age, right? And she was had other interests at that time, and she was very devastated, but with the death of her sister, but had different resources. She lived in a different community, but with the kids, they were number one. They had to have our attention first and foremost before we did anything, particularly after work in the evening, for our own benefit. They got our attention totally, and that's how I think we said, well, if we need additional help, we'll get additional help, but part of it's got to come from us, and the major part's got to come from us, and I think it did.
What did you do? Do you remember much of that period, Corey? What was that like for you?
Well, I mean, at the time that this was going on, this was 1987. I was a year old at this time.
Oh, okay.
But I think that for one, it's the length of time that the experience of grief takes or goes on is understated or misunderstood by some people. That it's a long process.
Yes.
So I think looking at it as an adult now, I understand that it was the context of the home that I grew up in, was growing up with parents who were working through this. But I certainly felt it as a kid, the love and the time and care that my parents put my way and my family's way. And with all of the loss of control that we as a family faced, the things that we couldn't control that were getting kind of hurled at us, what you and Mom could control was the home life inside, and
yes.
And yeah, so there was a lot of time and a lot of care and love that went towards us, for sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, to be honest, I mean, that time of my life is something that I'm still wrapping my head around.
Oh, I bet.
The context of that as my childhood of having parents that were devastated, and that we've had losses in our family since then. That I was old enough to recall and that I was a part of, and knowing how long those losses have taken to come to terms with, or figure out, or just establish some peace with.
Yes.
Let alone the loss of a child. It's so cliche to say it's unimaginable, but it is really, again, a work in progress for me to continue to try to understand, I think.
Well, yeah, and your reaction at as you said, you were just less than a year old, I think, when Megan died, and for the next year or so, you would, or the next couple of years, just out of the blue, periodically, you would come into the room that Mom and I were in, particularly Mom, and just sobbed uncontrollably. And when Mom would calm you down, what's happened? What's the matter? I miss Megan. Now, at that age, you wouldn't have had a lot of memories. You would have had some, absolutely. But that stayed with you, Corey, for a long time, in terms of that gap, that void in your life that you knew deep down was there and now isn't there.
Yeah.
And so it affected both you and your sister in different ways, but it affected you deeply.
I remember that. And I think it, it speaks to the intangible quality of the soul.
Sure.
I want to go really, really, really deep with it, that the soul has a memory that our brain does not. That would be my shortest the explanation that I can concisely say that I've come to peace with. So
yeah, absolutely.
Well, kids at that age are, whatever the parents are feeling, you're taking that on, you're maybe even magnifying it, so I can't imagine that you wouldn't be at least somewhat affected by your parents going through that, just on regardless of your age, really. I mean, even if you didn't know at 1 year old what was happening, you would feel it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, and with people who are dealing with it now, I think there's a real value in parents utilizing the strength, and not every family has those strengths we're looking for, but many do, that rely on the strengths within your family to help pull you through it, to help lead you through it, to be with you when you go through it, and not do it on your own. Find something beautiful, like I used Hornby Island, that gives you a look into the future, perhaps, and something you hadn't expected to see, but see. And the other thing, give yourself permission to laugh. And that may sound a little bit strange, but there were times where we were so full of grief that between the tears came some laughter.
Yeah,
the smallest thing that was a bit humorous was there to sort of laugh at. And I don't mean we did a lot of laughing, but the bit we did was valuable to us as a couple. It really was.
Yeah, I think that's what happens when you're processing emotion correctly, because we're not designed to stay in one state of emotion for any length of time. So
No.
if you're focused on your grief and you're talking about it, you're thinking about it, you're meeting with other people about it, you can't. It's just not possible to stay in that frame of mind forever.
No.
So once in a while, what's going to happen? You're going to bounce out of it, and
Yep.
and that's one of our kind of innate traits that allows us to deal with such things.
Yeah. And I look and say, one of the things I'm most grateful for is that Megan, the last 5 years of her life, she saw me sober.
Mm.
With my second oldest daughter, she hasn't seen me drink in 40 years. With Kate and Corey, they've never seen me drink. And that gives me strength as well.
Right.
It really does. It's part of the inner process of dealing with all my demons at times, but it does the trick.
Yeah.
And when I look and say, yeah, in a couple of weeks, it'll be 40 years since I had a drink. And on January the 1st just passed, it's been 40 years of marriage. And the two of those are very much integrated. They very much are.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That's quite a progression and quite a story, Ron. I wonder, have you ever thought about how things would be different if those tragedies never occurred, especially with you and your wife? Because it sounds like, I mean, maybe you wouldn't have seen the counselor there that provided you with so much insight had those tragedies not occurred, or maybe you wouldn't have been able to stay so focused on your kids and walk in a path that kept you away from alcohol. Do you kind of allow yourself to consider that once in a while?
Occasionally, it's come to mind, yes, and I think that where I was at each of those periods of time, something that either I did or somebody else did gave me a sense of strength that I hadn't felt. I can honestly say I hadn't felt at the top of my career. I hadn't felt as a teenager. I hadn't felt in my 20s. It wasn't there. But something peeled away that allowed me to say, I can be a better person. Now, I can be a better dad,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly I can be a better husband. And am I perfect? Gosh, no. But I think those events, like the counseling, that long period of counseling with the counselor, that wouldn't have happened if Megan hadn't been killed. And there's one example of maybe taking advantage of a situation that's completely devastating and coming out with some help and saying that was really what we needed. That helped us turn the corner.
Yeah. I mean, these are the silver lining type situations where, regardless of how devastating an event is, people either are crushed by it and never recover, or they find a way to continue on and probably become more resilient for the experience. And it sounds like that's what you've done.
Yes.
And Dad, as we're having this whole conversation, the thing that comes up for me is the power of choice and the power of the vocabulary that we use. And so in 1982, when you quit drinking, you said, you didn't have a choice, and you didn't give yourself a choice. You had a really pretty firm resolve about that.
Yeah.
And then the message in 1987 after Megan died was that you don't have a choice. You got to get your shit together and keep going for us and for your family and for yourself.
For the kids. Yeah.
And there's a lot of power in that. And of course we have choice. We all have choice. And we have choice to drink or not. We have choice with everything. But but the power of using that vocabulary is really fascinating to me. To because if you had said to yourself, "Well, I could go back to that," like would that have changed the outcome too? It's a powerful thing.
It is, and I really can't answer definitively, but the question in my mind always is, I can, with complete honesty, say that I've never once considered going back to drinking. And then I say, that sounds too simple. That sounds too easy. But I've never said, oh gosh, it'd be nice to have a drink. It just hasn't been something that has been there. And I can't fully explain that. Maybe someday somebody will write a book on it or something.
Well, I'm familiar with people having that experience. I've seen it before, especially for some reason in smokers. I don't know if you see somebody who maybe has tried 6 or 7 times to quit smoking, and then something happens and you see a change in them, and you can tell that they genuinely want to quit smoking. It's no longer a battle. There isn't two sides to it. No. They have decided that they don't want to smoke anymore, and therefore they quit.
Yes.
And it does sound simple. Unfortunately, getting to that point
isn't simple.
Isn't simple at all.
I know. As a former smoker, I can attest to that too. Yeah.
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 It's very interesting.
It is. It is.
And you quit smoking the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. But I quit smoking. The first time I quit smoking, Cor, was probably about 18. And I'd been smoking from the time I was 15. And a hockey player that I admired in the NHL at that time died of cancer. And that was it. I stopped. Stopped for 15 years and then started again. Stopped for 10 years and then started again. And that's how it went. And when we stopped last time, and your mother as well, it's never been gosh, I could really use a smoke. It's done. Mm-hmm. It's done. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it goes. Well, thanks very much for taking the time, Ron, to kind of share those stories with us. It's interesting for a whole bunch of different reasons, and I could probably ask you a whole bunch more questions, perhaps on another episode.
Sure, absolutely.
But you've given us a lot to think about here, and we appreciate it.
Well, being here today has been absolutely my pleasure, and you guys are doing great stuff, and I mean that, and keep it up.
Thank you very much. Did you want to add anything, Corey?
No, thanks a lot, Dad, for joining us on this episode. Your story, I'm familiar with your story. It's part of my story, but it certainly has been inspiring and helpful to me, and it's something I've reflected on as I've been on my own journey here. And good. And I think there's a lot of value, and I hope that it's helpful to our listeners too.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I think that's a wrap for episode number 11. We will say goodbye for now and see everybody next time.
Thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.